All right, so final video this morning on can we recreate the look of classic TriX in 2024 using Fomapan 400 film. If you haven't seen the previous videos, go check them out and please subscribe to this channel today. So we're gonna use two developers. Based on all the viewer responses, I've decided to work with Diafine and FRUD, the Figital Revolution Universal Developer. Those two, I think, are very different. They're both absolutely beautiful, and I'm really excited to see what the results look like. I've chosen a very difficult testing. You can see it behind me here. Lots of contrast, lots of dynamic range. And I'm curious to see how these two films look. Additionally, in this video, as promised, I went back to the 90s and pulled out a whole bunch of classic, a handful of classic TriX images that I scanned. One's from TX, one's from TXP, in 35, 120, and 4x5. So you'll get to see those examples as well in this video. And what was really kind of shocking to me is I've never scanned those images ever. Those images were wet darkroom for me. They were silver gelatin prints. And so this was the first time I'd ever looked at these negatives again since I made them back in the 90s. It was actually kind of fun to take a look at the images and scan them. And the whole time I'm there working on them in Photoshop, I'm remembering, oh yeah, I used to use potassium ferrocyanide and bleach this, or I had to burn this in. It was a nice trip down memory lane. For cameras, I've decided to work with two Rolly 35Ss. I've got my trusted spot meter. We've got our two rolls of film. Now you'll notice on this Rolly, there's a variable neutral density filter on the front of the lens. That's because on the set of exposures that we do in Diafine with the 400TX, 400TX gets a pretty big speed boost from Diafine, anywhere between 1,000 to 1,600. I'll post links to videos that I've done on that. So I'm gonna dial in like a 1.5, 2-stop reduction, just so the exposures and the develop and everything will look more consistent. And then for the second half of the roll, I'll take the variable neutral density filter off because that half will get cut and then it'll be processed in the FRUD. Right, so I've got my spot meter ready and I've metered the scene, and here's what I came up with. The area there on the dark side of the barn, that is a solid zone 3. The grass in the sun is a 7. And everything else falls very nicely between those two ranges. 7 should be perfect, 3 should be great. You can hear my chickens. And let's shoot the film and I'll take it to the studio, we'll process it and take a look at the scans. All right, so the first image that we're seeing here is from a 4x5 inch negative from TXP, definitely processed in D76 1:1. And this is from Shiprock, New Mexico. It's an old Ford truck going out. I made this image in 1995. And it's unbelievable how beautiful the tonal range is. One of the things that this image benefits from is the fact that TXP, which is the large format version, used to also come in 120, no longer of course, of TriX, it's what's referred to as a big toe film. It just has a massive toe. So a curve of film has really three main areas. There's the toe, the straight line, and the shoulder. The toe is the shadow information, the straight line is the midtones, and the shoulder is where your highlights go. Now, not all films have shoulders. Some films are very long straight lines. TXP has a massive toe, and as a result, I'm able to keep all of this beautiful long tonality in the lower portion here underneath the fin off of Shiprock. And yet at the same time, the sky has this unbelievably beautiful classic gray quality. It was nice reconnecting with this image. All right, this next artwork would be from the summer of 1992. This was definitely 120TX, not TXP, but TX, and processed definitely in D76 1:1. Look at the gray tonality. It's absolutely beautiful. This was one of the very first successful images I ever made with the Mamiya C330 twin lens. Great camera, and just absolutely loved the way this particular piece came out. If we zoom in, the grain structure, just the gray feel, the contrast, everything is just spot on to my eye for what I would want from an image like this. All right, so this next image is 35mm TriX, And this was processed again in D76 1:1 of my wife. We were in New Orleans, and this is a Cafe Du Monde. And this was not shot with the fancy camera. This was shot with an Olympus XA, probably wide open, I would suspect. Maybe 4 or 5, 6, somewhere in there. But this is classic TriX and 35 in D76. You can notice there's some nice pebbling of grain if we zoom in, yet the overall tonality and feel, it has that weight and that look of 35 TriX. And I, for one, think it's really, really beautiful in terms of its rendering and its ability to control the highlight to shadow range. All right, and the final image that I'm going to show you from the Steve archive is from France. I made this in 1999 down around Dijon. And this was made with a Cambo wide with a 58 millimeter Schneider XL lens with a 6x12 Horseman rollback on it. This was shot on TXP in 120. So it has a very similar contrast and dynamic range to the very first image that we saw of the Ford truck at Shiprock. However, this one was definitely processed in Xtol 1:1, which was at this time what I was using as a developer. And the overall tonality is just beautiful. Shadow to highlight is gorgeous. The detail, the grain structure. I loved everything about this. And once again, when I was doing the scan, I was remembering the bleaching and dodging that I did and all the different things that I would have done in the wet darkroom making the silver print. I think this was like 8 by 20 inches as an enlargement. But I think overall the contrast, feel, and tone is exactly what classic, in this case, TXP, feels like. Okay, so the first negative that we're looking at is TriX and diaphine at box speed. Once again, I used a variable neutral density filter to bring it into play. It has a lot of contrast. Once again, it was a very contrasty scene. And diaphine, TriX did a good job of controlling that. The values in the grass are still there. The barn still has nice value. The one thing I did notice is that the tonality, though, in the deep shadows there of zone 2 and zone 3 on the side of the barn are not quite as beautiful as I would like. There's more contrast and pop and less in terms of the way of subtle, beautiful tonality. So let's now take a look at the Fomapan, also at box speed, in diaphine. And what I immediately see when I look at the difference between the two is I like the look personally of the Fomapan and diaphine better. The shadow contrast has more separation in tonality. The sharpness between the two are both very good. Obviously, 400 TX has a little finer grain for sure than the Fomapan does, but the Fomapan's no slouch in this area either. I think the contrast control and just the overall feeling and the weight of the image. It has that heavier weight, like the portrait of my wife that I had done. There's a more of just an overall sort of density in the mids and stuff that I feel on the Fomapan film, whereas on the TriX film, I'm feeling more of a punch. And that to me is just a different look, depending on which one you like is the right choice for you. But now let's move on and take a look at FRUD. Okay, so the first image we're going to look at here is TriX in FRUD. Now, you'll notice the light is slightly different. I had an emergency phone call I had to go to, and it took about 50 minutes to come back, and as a result, the light had changed. However, the values were the same. I still was able to place that side of the barn at a zone 3, and I was able to place the grass still at a nice zone 7. So the values are still the same that we're seeing. And I'm seeing the same thing here that I saw with the TriX and diaphine. It's very beautiful. It has lots of punch and pop. The grain, if we zoom in, is reasonably sharp, and the image overall is reasonably sharp. But at the same time, I notice in the deep shadows that I'm not seeing the nuances of gray tonality, nor am I seeing that in the very bright grass. But overall, it does have a nice look, a nice rendering, and a nice amount of punch. So let's now take a look at Foma in FRUD. And what you can see is that it's a very open, very beautiful file. If you look into those deep shadows over there, there is way more subtlety of tonality. The highlights have way more subtlety of tonality. And this actually might be my favorite version of everything that I've seen so far. It was wicked easy to scan. The stand development, of course, controlled the highlights. If we zoom in and look at the grain and the sharpness, that little bit of Rodinal really sharpened it up. For this particular development, I did do it at what I would consider my normal method. So it is 2 milliliters of Rodinal to 2 milliliters of HC110 to 500 milliliters of distilled water. And that sat for 35 minutes. Absolutely controlled all the values. And I think that it has a really great look. Does it look like classic TriX? I think if you look at this one and compare it to like the portrait of my wife that I did, it does. It has a nice feel to it. But I'll get more into that in our conclusion coming up right now. All right, so in conclusion, did we achieve the goal of creating Fomapan 400 and sort of giving it the look of classic TriX? Did we achieve it? Additionally, what was your favorite film developer combination and why? Post all this in the comments. I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. I think that we came close. I think that FRUD or Rodinal with Fomapan 400 really has that classic TriX look to me. It isn't going to ever be 100%. The thing that I really noticed about the distinction between 400 TX, the new film, and the Fomapan was in those ones where I was showing the subtlety of tonality in the shadows and in the highlights. The current version 400 TX and all the different developers I've ever tried it in, it really likes to pick up contrast quickly. And that is a very popular look, but it annoys me just a little bit because I want sometimes to have better separation and a more nuanced approach in deep shadows, much like when I was showing the images made with TXP from France and the one from Shiprock, New Mexico. When you look at the unbelievable subtlety of shadow gradation and tonality, that's what I really want in a film. And I think that the Fomapan film in FRUD goes there. When I was looking at the side of that barn, I really felt that it was close. And I think it's about as close as we're gonna get. Okay, so another thing we should talk about is the difference between TriX and TXP. They're similar films, but they're different because, as I mentioned, one is a big toe film, the TXP, and TriX is more of your traditional S-curve in terms of its characteristic curves of the film itself. And as a result, this is a real advantage that large format photographers have today, is that with that film, as is illustrated by the image that I posted from France and the image that I posted from the desert Southwest, you can have this tremendous, long, beautiful shadow range that's really hard to beat. The only way to get that type of range out of TriX or more modern films, in many cases, is to do something like FRUD or a stand development, because all of that accentuates that long dynamic range. So when people say TXP and TriX are the same, it's actually not true though. I mean, really from a film characteristics look, they're different. And it's important to know that. But in terms of the classic quality of the materials, you know, I still wish TXP was made today in 120. I would shoot it all the time, but it's not. And when I do work in large format black and white, TXP is always close in hand. For those of you that are wondering what the actual negatives look like, here's a quick just photograph off my light table where you can see the negatives all the way around, and all the different developers had really good dynamic range from shadows to highlights. It's just what happened with that dynamic range in terms of the nuances of gray tonality. Once again, I think the Fomapan film has more to offer if you're looking for a more classic look, and also a look that doesn't have quite as much punch. If I had to pick a Kodak film to work with, TriX or say 5222, which is the XX film, I'd pick XX every day of the week. I think it's a nicer film. For those of you that want to try another film that looks an awful lot like kind of a hybrid classic TriX and TXP, it looks sort of like in between the two. XX is an awesome option. It is more expensive, but it does come in 35 and 120. I've written extensive articles and videos here in Figital Revolution about that film. It's one of my all-time favorite black and white emulsions when I want that vintage look. But hey, in the current economy right now, it's kind of hard to say no to Fomapan 400 and Fomapan 100. I should really just quickly mention, I love Fomapan 100 film. In particular, it's a very pushable film, but does it look like TriX? A few people made that comment here. I don't think that Fomapan 100 looks like TriX. Fomapan 100 looks more like APX by Agfa. It's definitely more of that look, specifically if it's in Rodinal. Great film, but if you're looking more for the grain structure and the look and feel, you know, Fomapan 400 for the buck is hard to beat. When you look at the quick snapshot of my wife and when you look at the portrait, the weight of the gray and the sort of the presence of it feels to me like the Fomapan 400 in Frud. That balance is there. You know, the relationship between Rodinal and HC110 could fluctuate a little bit, maybe to tighten it up or loosen up the grain a little bit, but I like that look, and that to me was the closest one. But that's just my opinion. I want to hear your opinion. So share your opinions, go to the comments, and thank you very much for going on with me here for the last couple of days doing these testings. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now go shoot some film.